looking back on it, one must seriously ask, what, if anything, besides the obvious vandalism, etc., did they achieve? What, if anything, did they really achieve? Welcome back to Good Morning Trumptopia, the special January 6th WTF Historical Day episode part 2. Thank you for tuning in, folks. It's now 2:09 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Friday, January 8th. Welcome back to the show, friends. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties and whatnot. I just forced you to listen to a song I'd already played before and thought I was talking myself into a transition, but the mic was off. But I've got it together now, and I give to you my always sincere and humble thanks for tuning in and welcoming me. I did not do my theater warm-ups today, folks. Thank you for welcoming me into the theater of your mind. What did, if anything, achieved? What was achieved? There's no doubt there was a plan. There's various reports coming from various platforms which are being responded to by the Trump base in various ways that this event seemed to have been openly planned. Like, it was just out there in what they call the open web, right? There's the dark web and the open web. The open web, all the platforms you and I are typically familiar with. Things like this podcast, social media like Facebook, etc., examples et al. Conversely, there's reports and allegations, as we were briefly touching on in the previous session, that this is all fake to some degree or another. I think the moon one was satire, right? I hope. I really hope. I really pray that there isn't a group of people out there thinking that the Capitol insurrection event was simulated on the moon for reals somehow, for some reason. It wouldn't make any sense. And of course, things like that, comic tragically, always make me think of that underground movie series. I think there's at least 2 of them, there might be 3, about Nazis living on the moon and how they're going to come back and get us all because they've been hiding away at the moon. Hitler never died, or I don't know. I didn't watch them. I might watch them. I believe they're available on a couple of different of the popular streaming movie platforms. There is such an overwhelming confluence of noise already emerging. And the one thing that I think truly I can say with confidence about January 6th and how it will be infamous throughout history, one of the things that will be prominent in that infamy is what a brilliant, interesting, what's the right term? Just sort of like bountiful example of this hyper cornucopia of too many things, echo chamber of echo chambers approach to fomenting chaos and distraction and conflict and all the things that get fomented. I mean, from the tip of the iceberg down to the broader spectrum, circles of social media networky kind of level, the various examples of hubris and hyperbole in the call to respond to the other side they're breathtaking when you really take a big couple of steps back to look at them. And they render this interesting pattern, which is that both sides are kind of, in a broad strokes way, not any one individual on both sides, but taken as a collective of collectives, they're kind of mirroring each other in their accusations towards one another. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern and disambiguate. And that may very well be part of the desired sort of outcomes, right? For what is any of it about? It's impossible to say. There's so many theories. Which one do you choose? You get overwhelmed. And then so people get swept up in the one that clicks enough for them. That's my theory. There's, on both sides, there's people coming to this point of exhaustion or outrage or frustration that they need to declare their countrymen and fellow citizens on the opposing side to be all kinds of hideous names and foul things, and then there's this mutual disgust that emerges, and this broadening of the gap. I was mentioning shiny examples. That's what I wanted to dig up and find. The reason I didn't find it was I was looking on the wrong device. Silver lining, friends. There is, and hopefully always shall be, the deep, sincere, raw opportunity for bridging the divides and healing them. The following is a statement I snagged off of Instagram, which was being shared by multiple other accounts on Instagram, and it was trending along with the Black Lives Matter hashtag. If that offends you, you have to ask yourself why. Especially if you purge yourself of any unnecessary assumptions or projections onto the words and statement and cause. Because there's a lot of nonsense that's being projected onto it. And vice versa. But I digress. That's not the most important part. I think the example of what it is, I want to paraphrase. I don't want to read the whole thing. It's kind of a lengthy thing. But this account is an individual, person's retelling of a moment that they had via text with a person that they're very close to, that they care a lot about, but that ideologically has been for some time now on the opposite side, right? And presumably this other person is a Trump supporter. And the title of it is, quote, "I see now." And it begins with the statement, 3 words from a super close friend who lives on the opposite side of the aisle as I do. 3 words that finally broke me and I wept. The post goes on to explain that this other person is a middle-aged Trump voting man. There's much love between them, and that they have spent the 4 years during the Trump administration having deep talks, each of them taking turns really listening and taking turns simply and genuinely and authentically explaining their concerns. Presumably, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt without turning to the ego traps of spiteful and hurtful argumentative tactics that bring people closer and closer towards hurtful and then hateful speech. I could be wrong. Maybe they had a few terse and challenging discourses in the 4 years. I don't know. This author does point out that never did they have a conversation about policy. It was always a conversation about a president. And importantly, I'd like to highlight here, the goal wasn't to turn him from his conservative roots. The goal wasn't, as in was not, to make him lean left. It was simply to be seen. It seems as though that after those 4 years of deep, honest, meaningful, challenging, but authentic, presumably loving conversations, as hard as they may have been, the author's friend responded after, if I'm not mistaken, this was posted after, although you know what, with Instagram it's almost always impossible to tell for sure, especially if you're just like, oh, I screenshotted that for future reference, because you know, those things just disappear and they're impossible to find anymore, unless you remember the exact account and you go to it. I can't tell from either of these two screen images when this happened, but I got the impression that it was like a new post and that it was happening now, like it was relatively within real time. And the pictures that the original author shares also makes it feel that way. And they close their thing. Part of their closing statement is, after an exhausting 24 hours, I see a notification from this dear friend. I am going to make an educated guess that the exhausting 24 hours is January 6th. Because I saw this yesterday on January 7th. He closes, truly, after quoting his friend again, I see now, saying that doesn't mean he's turning his back on his values. It simply means he's facing me and protecting mine. This is why I won't stop sharing. This is why I won't quit. This is why I won't let up. Because this is who we are as Americans. This is how we will heal. If by healing he means hearing each other, seeing each other, and understanding each other, that the ideology separates us and that there's a truth that's probably bigger than the ideology has room to even account for, never mind whatever shenanigans they're playing, I completely agree. Of course, I don't know the deeper details. That's a person's share on the Instagram. The account is Loswit. I'm not sure how it's meant to be pronounced. It seems to be spelled Loswit. It could be Iowshit, but Loswhit. And it was featured or highlighted by the Black Lives Matter hashtag. And of course, that whole cyclical argument is frustrating as all hell. And I've addressed it before in the show. If you haven't heard my thoughts on that, please dig around and find it. It would take us on a huge sidebar right now. And I don't say that to be dismissive of it. My opinion is pretty specific and generally, I hope, is seen in favor of and in support of Black Lives Matter, while also taking my own personal stance, despite whatever people project and accuse on me, that yes, Black Lives Matter, and yes, everyone has the right to protest, but also violence breeds violence, and we should prevent ourselves and help each other not fall into that temptation. And that, because ultimately it's an ego trap. And for those of you, for anybody who's new, and for those of you who just haven't heard me say it yet, even though you've been poking around my social media and or the podcast for a while, here's the fundamental problem I have. Now, conspiracy theory is, despite what the bravado and confidence and hubris of some of the members of the community, it is all theory, right? So in theory, I say to you, dear friends, if the system of oppression is real, if there is a cabal or a group of cabals, if there are different nodes of power and they are indeed playing games manipulating us, one of the obvious things that I cannot comprehend, I scream it from the rooftops, and it's like people never see that. They never comment on these posts that are overtly this, and then when they come back at me and try to accuse me of being hypocritical about something that I've said, it's like they never saw these particular, themed quotes or posts of mine. But the system wants your violence. I don't know how often I can say it. For those of you who've heard me say it before, bless your heart for being patient and putting up with me saying it again. Theoretically speaking, I don't know. I don't pretend to know, and I'm not accusing anybody that might sue me of anything specific. But if there is a system of oppression, whatever else it may be doing, whatever shenanigans it may be involved in, it seems to be obviously cranking out content designed to pit everyone against everyone else and foment chaos, confusion, conflict. And those are things that are profiteered on by other aspects of the same group of whoever they are. Otherwise, why would they go to such great efforts and great lengths? There's a lot of ways we can unpack and analyze the events of January 6th. There's a lot of emergent conspiracy theories. Was it an inside job? Did they have inside information? Why? And there's a lot of dangling questions, that some of which are absurd and ridiculous, some of which are really, really important and probative. And there's just, there's details and aspects of this whole incident that, are curious, strange, bizarre, laughable, complex set of historical events. But deep down, at the bottom of it, folks, the invocation, the seduction towards, the cajoling of anyone ready to be cajoled into choosing violence is at the heart of all of it. And it's working, because people are being violent. And if we want to see peace in the world, we must all take a big deep breath, maybe spark up a joint or two, sit, meditate. I know you can't meditate. Everyone says it. Give it a shot anyways. Even if it means not meditating very well, it's okay. It is a practice. It's not something you just magically do after 10 seconds of pretending to try it. Why do I point back to that? Why do I think that's a better solution than any of the other solutions being bandied about? And there's some other, mind you, keep in mind, there's plenty of other things that are being suggested that I agree with. Reform, reevaluation of the way the system works, soul searching at an individual and community level of all kinds, political and otherwise, and a general new attempt to reconnect the various patchwork quilt chunks of society, to mend the slightly ripped up quilt that is the American experience, the American experiment, the American phenomena. As we've explored in previous episodes, going way back to the very beginning, hypocrisy is not something Donald Trump invented, right? Hypocrisy is a big problem. Some say it is human nature. Some embrace that idea of it being human nature so tightly that they indulge in the active practice and perfection of their own capacity and skills in being an agent of hypocrisy. And that's an alarming thing, right? But from the really simple, clear example of the way in which Trump sent them off, giving them marching orders to go fight and show their strength at the Capitol building. And then, within hours after the whole thing started getting a little wonky, told them to go home in peace, and in one of his various statements shamed them and appeared, at least made the brief temporary gaslighting cosplay at reprimanding them and condemning them and turning his back on them. It is in fact being reported that on such sites as The Donald and others, there is a backlash of supporters that feel he has indeed run away from them and left them hanging in the wind. And they shouldn't be so surprised. There is a pattern to the two-facedness of Trump that some folks have been trying to point out to those in the base. And with that gentle, tough love, kind of, persistence, we must continue to remind them that it was there all along. And yes, you should be disappointed that he got you, but you should also just get over it, own up to it, step up to it, and do the right thing and transcend having been caught up in the web of his lies and charismatic cult of personality enchantments. Because he's not he promised the base a divine revolution, and he really just sort of sent them up shit creek without a paddle and drove the bus over them. Shit creek's real shallow. You can drive the bus right through that shit. And zooming back, I'd like to remind those or introduce it to those who haven't heard it yet. Remind those who have, and reintroduce it now for those who haven't. I am of the humble but sincere and purposefully sort of self-labeled spiritual opinion that all of this is a symptomology of this thing I call the deeper and problematically ancient spiritual trauma that is the object from which we are distracted from by the system that has corrupted our politics and organized religion and other cultural institutions, theoretically speaking. And that time has come, friends, for your listening pleasure. EDM, club, groove, pad, hop. Oh no, that's a really short one. Never mind. I started introducing that one and it's itty bitty. That's just more of like a little intro chunk. Let's do Too Much Funk. Is There Such a DJ Zed groove pad mix, funk messenger style? got to get away from that fiery rhetoric and conspiracy theory. Name the progenitor of that quote. You know, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it and I wouldn't have guessed it. But that was Lindsey Graham. When did I see that? I believe I saw that either pretty late last night or early this morning. Oh, that's another thing. What was that thing? It's all out of order now. Lindsey Graham apparently got his spine back. On C-SPAN, I watched a presentation or a speech that he gave in response to the events of January 6th and to clarify and give some definition to his apparently newfound stance, because he got a lot of questions after apparently having saying some fiery things at 3 a.m. Washington time once everybody got back into chambers, and proceeded with the business of counting the electoral slates that were officially certified and issued by the electoral systems or officers of each state. I don't have quotes from the speech in chambers. I know he said something cool, and I know I saw parts of it. And I know that one thing I can kind of paraphrase from memory, which was like, enough is enough. Joe Biden won. Let's get over it. Or something very similar to that effect. But this C-SPAN thing, he came on and then gave a prepared statement. He seems like one of those older school politicians that studied a little bit of public speaking with someone from a theatrical background, because he sounded well rehearsed and very much off script. I don't think he was reading from a teleprompter, and I don't think he was reading from notes. He was just sharing he might have been going, totally freeballing it. I don't know. But it seemed really well organized and really well structured. And it had this cadence to it that felt like a well-crafted speech from, in collaboration with a speech writer. And I don't say that disrespectfully. And I got to say this. Setting all my prior policy differences aside with the guy as a political figure, I'm letting go of my traditional critique of his own individual glaring hypocrisy in regards to how he has spoken about and respected or disrespected Donald Trump. When I was sitting through that C-SPAN coverage of this statement that he was giving, I could not disagree with what he was saying regarding, the events of January 6th, the security breach at the Capitol building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, his answers after the statement part, he opening statement, then he took questions, right? His answers in that Q&A part, not so much. It's going to have to say 60-40, disagree 60, agree 40 with the rest of that content. But the one gem, which was kind of like a throwaway line, he was transitioning from answering another question and sort of already doing this, I'm looking around the room to pick another journalist, it's going to be you kind of thing. And he wasn't saying that, but he was his body language, his eye motions and facial body language and all that. And he sort of said this to the last answer as a bumper, to the last reporter as a sort of afterthought. Got to get away from the fire rhetoric and conspiracy theory. 100%, friends. Here's one of the problems with Donald Trump conspiracy theory. I'm really convinced, I'm going to advance this again. This is relatively new development in my thesis, my theoretical, matrix of what I think is going on. I'm fairly certain that there are two primary pro-Trump echo chamber pools or echo chamber chambers, right? Chambers of echo chambering. One is the one that is created in the trifecta of Trump's own content creation, which he generates like some sort of black box AI algorithm by just hyper-consuming news media and ranting and raving. And to some degree or another, what I do and what he does isn't terribly different, in as much as that I respond to what I see on the news, with the caveat that I understand that the news media is the news media, and it has its flaws, and some of which is valid and accurate coming from conspiracy theory content, and a lot of which is not, in terms of what the conspiracy theory content claims. A lot of it is questionable, and or yet to be viably confirmed independently, right? And I'm not one here to make wild, meaningless accusations either. And ultimately, there must be consensus that a certain baseline chunk of the content involved in news media is actually accurate, because it's actually what happened. They're actually literally just telling us what happened. And then the talking echo chamber spinning of each particular brand or flavor, is layered up on top of that. Unless, of course, you're a hoax is everything as a hoax kind of person. Now, there's a note there. I was just looking at that, and I clicked away from it. The problem with everything being a hoax is that everything can't be a hoax. But if you condition yourself into dismissing anything and everything and everyone that your favorite outlets or thought sources or influential, content creators tell you to, or that you just plain old disagree with because you've internalized the habit and it's no longer even about the talking points or about what they're disagreeing with, it's about whatever you disagree with, then it's psychosis. Or something approaching that. It's no longer, it certainly sure as fuck isn't any kind of critical thinking, right? No longer is it a critical analysis. You're a hoax, everything's a hoax, Santa Claus is Santa Claus is a bit of a hoax. And the tragedy is that it is actually happening, right? Like, what if the real hoax is that everyone's getting hooked by a hoax? Mixed in with some truthiness and some real facts, and we're all being pushed into these echo chambers that are trying to get us to dismiss everybody else so that nothing can ever be agreed upon ever again. We don't need that. That's crazy talk. So many things. But as we move forward and as we get, this time next year, we're going to be marking the anniversary of this event. And it representing sort of the beginning of the end, right? Hopefully, knock on wood, of this version 1.0 expression of an attempt at establishing the Trumptopian empire. By the way, folks, should you be relatively new to the show and be curious, I do believe I was one of the first, if not the original coiner of Trumptopia. There's a lot of other curiously close but not quite the same variations on some sort of play on Trump's name, but not terribly long after he rode down the escalator, I was the one that started calling this special segment where I focus on commenting on Trump, his impact, what he stands for in the world, I think, etc., calling in the segment Good Morning Trumptopia. Not to brag, a little humble flex for sure, but what was the point of saying that? I just want to let you know that that's the case, because it's true. Having said that, right, as we eventually come to terms with needing to recognize today, in the future, I think, and I know this is a crazy idea, but hear me out. Just hear me out. This is my most recent national holiday idea proposal. I've had others, right? Like, I want to make voting day into voting weekend national super holiday. I've already rambled about that, and I want to do a better, more well-organized presentation of it again in the not-too-distant future. But that's for a little bit later down the road when Biden's back in office. But this is a new one. Excuse me. 1 second. I hate it when that happens. I just needed to clear my throat and take a drink of water, and I didn't want to record weird, awkward noises. Here we go. Hear it out. Just hear me out. National holiday proposal. Can we please make this day, January 6th of 2021, in American history, and its anniversary, right? Like the anniversary of it, a national holiday for the purposes of giving thanks to the fact that the Trumtopian attempted insurrection was indeed a failure. That it failed. They stormed the Capitol building. They trashed some things. Some of them may or may not have probably committed felonies, according to... I've got a reference to that. Hold on a second. But other than those things, what did they really achieve? They didn't stop Congress from performing its duties of certifying the Electoral College vote, etc., etc., etc. We walk through it, right? Like, Trump and his team exhausted their legal, perfectly normal, they had the right to do them, options. And there they are. And so I think it'd be good for the catharsis of the nation to never forget the absurdity of Trump and his attempt to sort of seduce a certain demographic of America to turn around and judge all the rest of their fellow Americans on how they are choosing to be Americans, as if doing that wasn't flat out, hypocritically, the most categorically un-American thing to do. I think we could call it the failed Trumtopian Insurrection Day. I don't know. I'm still working on a title. Working title. Trumtopian Clusterfuck of Failed Coup d'etat. Which one's better? Which one's funnier? But it'd be great to have, like, a redonkulous first national holiday in remembrance of this thing, both to honor the 4 unfortunate people who passed away, which is 5, sorry, I think it's 5, right? Because didn't someone just recently, yes, one of the law enforcement officials, I don't remember if he was from the DC police or one of the other agencies, but apparently passed away from injuries acquired during the raiding of the Capitol. I'm not sure which is more, which of the two options is more appropriate. The insurrection of failure. And theoretically, hopefully, with enough time, as a nation, we might be able to all turn around and forgive each other, and especially forgive them, and have a good laugh. And yes, hold them accountable. Right. I found the posts from the day of. This was right in the midst of of the breaking news. And I get it. News media, the personalities on the news, corruption, they're all owned by the same small cabal of corporations and people, blah, blah. I know. But as far as I understand, this particular host is and was indeed, a well-trained lawyer. And to the best of my understanding, when they have spoken in the past, and in this instance here, about what the law happens to actually be in regards to people and whether or not they might be in legal exposure for being persecuted or charged with violating those laws, he's generally pretty dead on. No matter what you got to say about the corruption of the media outlet, he doesn't make up laws that don't exist, and he doesn't pretend that people didn't commit crimes when they probably really did. On the face of it. Obviously, always innocent until proven guilty, but probable cause is probable cause. So Ari Melber from MSNBC posted the following, and I quote, "As a legal matter, the people now gathered at and inside the Capitol building are trespassers, not protesters. They face legal exposure for the serious federal crimes, including trespassing, unlawfully entering a government building, impeding government business at a government building, entering such a building with a weapon or causing injury, damaging government property." If I'm not mistaken, some, if not all of those, are felonies. And what's the point of me pointing that out? Well, it's a shit maneuver. It was a bag of dicks prank that Trump pulled on his fan base attending his speech, that then turned around and marched up to the Capitol building, did what they did at great risk to legal exposure of criminal indictment and jail time and becoming felons. And they did it gleefully because they understood what he was communicating to them at the speech. Now, plenty of people who are generally either in the pro-Trump camp or part of the pro-Trump coalition, who are probably beginning to make their way towards pivoting away from him, I think, are trying to find rationalizations to sort of mitigate the statement or deflect from the accusation that Trump's speech instigated the following actions. While I'm not so naive as to blindly and irrationally insist that things have a cause and effect when they might not, or when it's also very possible and realistic that they aren't really in true direct cause and effect, there are corollary relationships, and there are prolonged sort of distributed causal relationships. And the speech, as given hours before the infamous event unfolded at the Capitol, besides that speech, Trump has posted on social media and said things in interviews and thrown statements at press, whatever they call those splash pools, or at press kickers, and all the different little jargon names for when there are reporters in front of him. He's a whirlwind of conflicting and statements, and a cacophony of seemingly self-contradictory claims and remarks. But it's not so sophisticated as to hoodwink many of us, I don't think. And it's not so far-fetched as to be understood as the kind of thing that could be described as wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, go to violence on my behalf, but don't admit to it. If I may create an analogy, out of thin air. The President of the United States is two things at once when we say those words, right? It's the individual, the person. In this case, Donald Trump, but obviously different people in other times. And also the office, the institutional, bureaucratic, systematic gear workings of trying to organize this boat we call the United States of America, this civilization, this nation state of 50 states, 51 states, 53 states. It is ridiculous that those two territories, bunny ears of bitter scything sarcasm. There's a phrase, I don't remember how it goes. Really should be states, but I digress. I found the thing about hoaxes. One of the problems that we are currently really sort of coping with, everybody in their own way, everybody from their own perspective in their own camps, but everyone's kind of waking up to it in chunks and pieces and maybe making some misguided assumptions, but then recovering from them, hopefully, is this. Theoretically speaking, if there are hoaxes out there hoaxing people and convincing them of nonsense, then there are multiples of them coexisting. There isn't just the one that you like to make fun of people for. Furthermore, most, not all, but most of the people self-righteously judging others, belittling them and calling them names for theoretically or falsely or really buying into one of the other hoaxes, those folks who are busy spewing that kind of hate, that kind of talking point, often don't realize that what they're doing because their own particular preferred flavor o hoax that they stumbled into on their own end of the spectrum that they're hooked into. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to spell out why they call it an echo chamber. Because they call it an echo chamber of echo chambers for a reason. Arguably, people, and if you're thinking this right now as you listen, you aren't the first. People try to fold that kind of thing when I make these kind of comments back on me. And I'm like, yes, except, and I don't think I'm spewing hate speech, and I'm not judging anybody. I'm pointing out the things I literally am observing in the world around me and sharing my opinion about those in the abstract and in theory. And then saying, if the theory is true, what is the best way we can respond to it? To all of it, to the mess, the cacophony, the madness. Well, I'll tell you what, friends. Rampaging through government buildings is probably humorously more on point in a way, as some memes you might recall from earlier last year in 2020, than, torching 7-Elevens and mom and pop shops, or even, megacorp box chain stores. Looting and destroying property and hurting other people and or the livelihoods of other people and or threatening lives and or, fomenting violence, perpetuating violence, threatening violence, wishing violence upon others, just harboring it in one's heart, intellectually, remotely from far away, without stepping a toe on the street. That's the point of the hoax. Your hoax, their hoax, everybody's hoax. That's what the system wants. Why are we giving it to them? While we're going to discuss and debate and, the various media environments and markets will of course, render their version of this, and I may already sound like some of the things they're talking about. And they may sound like some of the things I'm talking about. Because curiously and curiously, things I've said a while back, have seen eventually said on TV. And conversely, I've been told by others that I sound like I'm just parroting this or that channel, right? And I've caught myself saying that to others because indeed they do, because they will share things that I hear being spoken on Fox News or whatever. Ultimately, that happens on multiple levels for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that television is indeed a way to share ideas, which, we can even see in a sort of benign way. And obviously we can see a nefarious version of idea sharing. There's also the metaphysical level, which I've addressed sort of a couple of different times, I think, in different segments. But simply put, the human species is on a species-wide energy mental frequency network. And we cohabitate some portions of our mental bandwidth. We share that. It's distributed. Kind of like a server farm with various terminals all over the place. The terminals have some functionality that reside locally, but they rely on most of the, the real heavy lifting computationally being done by whatever you call the big machine in the other room. The cloud machine, the main server, etc., etc. Human beings are like that. Despite the fact that we don't perceive a direct physical connection to one another, there is an etheric, esoteric, metaphysical, trans-dimensional, species-wide energy network that connects us all. And, like they say, geniuses think alike or whatever. We process big ideas and big events and big emotions and big feelings individually and sort of in a distributive network kind of way. Or so I humbly propose to you as one of the many aspects of my eccentric and unusual theory. I hope, though, that the deeper we investigate this day in the future, that we really truly do give ourselves the opportunity and each other the opportunity to see how it is part of the evidence. Today is this singular day, January 6th, right? Not today now, January 8th. Of evidence that theoretically speaking, the system is like a provocateur of political infighting here in this environment. And that, as I proposed very early on from Trump's earliest days running for office, that it's testing constantly in various ways, direct and indirect, like a stress test of with various variables and parameters, how far in some extreme directions we are willing to go. And as appealing and seductive and sometimes even entertaining and fun as it might be to get caught up on one side or the other of that, I humbly propose to you that you please be advised and take into consideration that the system of oppression, given the theoretical idea that it has hijacked government, right, is purposefully trying to manipulate people into political, ideological conflict, with the ultimate long-term goal of fomenting violence, of creating, instigating, causing politically, ideologically driven violence. The last 30 years is riddled with evidence that points towards this. Now, we can fearmonger ourselves into paranoia, apoplectic shock of immobility about it and make boogeymen out of everybody and accuse everybody in every office of being deep state. But that is counterproductive and feeds into the very agenda we're trying to become better aware of and free ourselves from. We must not give the system what it wants. We must give the human species what it deserves and needs. Now, building consensus, creating a global agreement is one thing, but one of the earliest baby steps that must be, I think, important to sort of get established is that, all of this is about getting, here in the local example, Americans to judge their fellow Americans over how to be Americans in a way that is irreconcilable, that cannot be resolved, because it just escalates and escalates and escalates and escalates, because it's attached to ideological constructs that don't really have like the meat on the bone that they appear to. That's a weak analogy, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. And I pray, I beg, I entreat you, please, friends, do not give the system what it wants. Do not think violent thoughts against those you do not even know, right? Like, what good does that do? Yes, political actors from all over the world do horrible things, do ridiculous things, do idiotic things. And we must hold them accountable. We must also keep hold ourselves accountable to ourselves and keep ourselves in check, right? And when it comes down to it, we must speak these hard pill to swallow truths to our friends and neighbors, not with anger and hate and outrage, because then we become just like them if we disagree with the way they're behaving. Why become just like them? But with the kind of tough love, compassion, and loving, healing forgiveness that is the sort of hard, tricky, challenging, difficult, it takes a lot of patience to do, healing practice that was in fact the message, from the person we point to with the name Jesus Christ. And if you haven't heard my Christmas special yet from 2020, go check out my 2020 Jesus Christ Christmas special. Oh, I wish I'd actually labeled that. 2020 Jesus Christ Christmas special is a pretty great title. Darn it. I'll have to maybe incorporate that title when I go back to revisit it and do any post cleanup and updates. Friends and listeners, I've rambled on quite a bit for part 2. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything that I want to include into this. There's so many swirling questions, and I keep coming around to that, soundstage on the moon statement, because a real critical thinker always pauses to take even the wildest outlier suggestion or theory or idea to pause and contemplate it and take it a little bit seriously. What if this is truly all faked? Is that shocking? Is that weird? Is that crazy? Is that plausible? Is that believable? And what conclusions can be drawn from it? If it was all faked, why? Well, I mean, the problem with it's all faked is that you can boil down the rationalizations for faking something to a boilerplate set of talking points that sound reasonable and applicable to anybody's defense against being accused of being a faker. Follow me? To the best of my understanding, two reportedly very real explosive devices were confirmed by multiple sources having been found by law enforcement in and around the Capitol building's compound or complex, because there's a couple of buildings all nestled together there. I don't know the exact details of where. I do understand that they were, according to the reporting I came across, removed and detonated safely. No one was injured, no one was harmed, no one was at risk. And there was some confusion, and I haven't heard any updates or clarity other than the last one. But there was some early confusion as to whether the bombs were at the Capitol building or the RNC headquarters or the DNC headquarters. The most recent update on that note that I heard was that there were two real bombs found somewhere on the Capitol grounds and two not real devices. In other words, they were phonies, they were hoaxes, and those are the ones supposedly found at the headquarters of each political party, which I'm not sure where they're located. And that could have been wrong. That could have been any number of misunderstandings getting compounded into a sort of, telephone daisy chain miscommunication error. And I haven't heard any new updates about that. So I'm not going to pretend that that's definitive, other than to say that two real explosive devices is supposed to be confirmed and definitive, and beyond that, they're being vague about the details for security's sake, because they haven't found who did it, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, and we know that it wasn't a real functioning noose, so it didn't look like one to me. I'm sure it wouldn't work exactly right. I don't know if it would have even held up any weight, because it looked a little flimsy. But the group of people that broached the perimeter and got onto the campus of the Capitol building built in front of the steps a noose on a, makeshift hangman's thing. What do you call those? Scaffold? Darn it. There goes a word whose error file not found on me today. Gallows, right? Hangman's gallows. The little flimsy wooden structure. This was just like 2x4. 3 pieces of 2x4 to make a basic arch. And a bit of rope tied to a loop at the end. And I'd have to pull it up and magnify it and look at it to see. I highly doubt it was a functioning, slidey uppy down, break your neck correctly kind of noose. But that's irrelevant. The imagery is potent. Simultaneously, in the final days leading up to the election, and especially heightened since the election, I've noticed that plenty of folks are willing to freely talk about and reference the use of guillotines as a means to solve whatever political problem they're griping about. And that's beyond un-American and ridiculous. Threatening people with bodily harm is not protected by free speech and has never been considered an American value. Or has it? Feeling entitled to threaten people with assassination might very well be as American as American Pie and owning slaves. But we're torn up about it, right? And there are folks willing to live in that on that side of the fence, and there's everybody else wanting to live on the opposite side of the fence where that's no longer okay. It's, where stringing people up is not cool and not a reasonable response to civic or private disagreements. But it is indeed evidence that Americans have been seduced into looking out across the political landscape and judging their fellow Americans as unworthy of being alive. And that, my dear friends, is categorically un-American. Hating and judging your fellow Americans over how to be American, well, that's the catch-22. That's the bind we have, right? Because of the traumatic way in which this country was founded, because of the spiritual trauma from that historical passage alone. Never mind the centuries of violence and trauma that came before it. So many questions, and I don't know the answers to them all, friends. But I do see lots of patterns. It's fascinating how we kind of come full circle, right? The left and the right, they create a whirlwind or a vortex in which eventually they start to resemble each other in sort of topsy-turvy, inverse opposite principles of ridiculousness. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. Plenty of acquaintances and friends over on the left get angry, upset, frustrated, butthurt a little bit, and defensive, and exclaim with passion that it is inaccurate and unfair to say the left and the right are the same. And for clarity, I would like to humbly propose that my position is much more nuanced than that. I'm not trying to create equal parity. I'm saying they are both complicit at the level in which there is corruption. The corruption is spreading somewhat evenly from a unified source or a collection of various sources that are somewhat similar. And they operate in ways that benefit each other and also allow for the opportunity to gaslight and pay lip service to the idea of fighting one another. I don't mean to be dismissive, right? It's difficult. It's a hard conversation to have for anybody when they're deeply respectful of or hopeful of, aspirationally caught up with, bound by admiration to, when someone's really enamored with a political figure, which in and of itself there's something wrong. You can look up to people and admire them as heroes if they are worthy of it and they've been true heroes. The problem is someone calling themselves a hero over and over again, and then creating nonsensical problems for them that they themselves are supposed to fix, and then boofing it, like just screwing the pooch on trying to fix their own problems that they themselves created. That person does not deserve anyone's hero worship, especially if the net result of their leadership for 5 years is that people in their own base execute violent actions, right? And then in the name of Trump. And then simultaneously also, on many levels, it's like they've created the parody. The system has created the parody. Both sides can accuse the other side, seemingly rightfully so, of a lot of things beyond the list I already used in part 1, right? Both sides can be accused of having been responsible for fomenting violence. Both sides can be accused of having betrayed the American people. Both sides can be accused of being riddled with corruption. Both sides can reasonably be accused of needing to be investigated. It's never an easy pill to swallow when it's your side that you got to own up to fits into both sides of, the way I phrased that, right? Like, no one wants to admit that. The Trump supporters obviously do not want to admit that Trump needs to be investigated and probably arrested and put in jail because he is corrupt. Always has been. He's always been a charismatic narcissist trying to create his own personal echo chamber of, blind faith, cult of personality, belief in him, of adoration in him. And earlier when I was saying is that there are multiple Trump-based echo chambers, the other one is the QAnon echo chamber, and I kind of spiraled way away from it, never came back to it. But it's from the QAnon echo chamber that you get this hypocrisy of taking credit for the event and also saying Antifa did it. You know what I mean? Like, patriots stormed the Capitol. Oh, but it's Antifa really that did all the bad things. That seems to be, to the best of my ability, to trace it back. And I'm not some cyber sleuth, right? I'm not an investigative journalist of any kind. But from what I'm able to see from my perspective, surveying as broadly as I can, there seems to be evidence to indicate that polarity and like that oxymoronic hypocrisy seems to be emerging from there. I mean, Trump certainly isn't helping because he creates his own. He funnels various. The reason he spits out conspiracy theory is because he obsessively compulsively consumes the media that he consumes, and he will binge more media that praises him, supports him, offers him ideas and suggestions that seem to be in his best interest according to his own greedy, weird self-interests. But I digress, friends. If we are all born into a world that is entrenched in an evolving echo chamber of echo chambers system of ideological pendulum swing, stress test manipulation and sort of bait and switch pushing around, what are we to do? What are we to do? I love the "what would Jesus do" question because despite not wanting to be associated with organized religious Christianity, I do believe that contemplating the question in terms of a clearer, more authentic understanding of who that persona of Yeshua Christos might have been is a worthy exercise. Would Jesus have stood in front of the White House and given a speech where he told you to go march into the Capitol building and thrash it, and then two-facedly turn around and castigate you and turn his back on you? No, of course not. Call me crazy, but he wouldn't be playing politics at all. But put a pin in that, folks, because that's a whole nother episode. Because despite the fact that there is supposed to be a clear bright and unmistakable division between church and state. We got all this political, ideologically driven hate speech that's backed up by, and our side is right because God says so. And we're going to have to break some of that down too. Because you better believe that some of the folks, if not all, some of the folks who made their way into the Capitol building probably believed that they were marching with some righteous, holy, Jesus-baptized army of Christian, soldiers for Trump. And we need to help dispel them of such delusions. Because, and I know that people disagree, and we've got to work our way through to build a better understanding around, which side might be most accurate. But I'm fairly convinced after a lifetime of spiritual seeking, reading, investigating, questioning, and listening and paying attention to religion in its various forms, and then, of course, reality itself and nature and that which divinity might be outside of organized religion. And I'm fairly convinced, folks, that divinity itself, that which we call God, herself, or himself, does not play politics. Corrupt leaders of organized religions do. They butcher and murder and rape and pillage as well, historically speaking. But, like I said, put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. I've rambled on long enough for a two-parter today, friends. In conclusion, January 6th was a lot of things. And as we discuss them, we must not get caught up in the finger pointing of laying blame and all that. We must be clear-eyed about whether or not we are a nation of laws or not. We must be clear-eyed and authentic and genuine about what laws we agree with and what laws we disagree with, and what do we do when big groups of people go and do things like they did on January 6th with, which are officially, formally, and undeniably things identified by the law as against the law. And that's a tough discussion to have, folks, because there are different people for which we would have different answers to those sets of questions. There are people who we would want to exonerate because they broke laws that we consider unfair or invalid. And each and every one of us might have a completely different set of opinions about which laws are the ones that are unfair and invalid. So that turns into a whole broader, bigger discussion. But in terms of what's actually going to happen in the immediate future and what it means for the short-term, medium-term, and long-term development of historical current events in this community of communities we call the Empire of Trumptopia, formerly known as the United States of America, it is worth taking the time to express and hear each other out. Thank you, dear listeners, for taking the time to hear me out. And trust me, yes, I want to make the effort, and I'd love to have the staff and the funding to be able to make an even bigger, broader reach effort to take in your thoughts and share them with the world on the show, and have a public discourse conversation with everyone about everyone's ideas and how we identify the best ideas that bring about the highest possible outcome that benefits the most number of people possible. Because that's where I think, the best possible next steps might be found. Dear friends, you are kind and supportive when you tune in and hear me out. And so I thank you. And I wish you a safe and groovy day. Sleep well, dream creatively, rest up, and take on tomorrow like a new opportunity to be an even better version of yourself so that you can help humanity become a better version of itself. And we can hopefully maybe right this ship we're all... Oh, yeah, that makes me realize we're not all in the same ship. Put a pin in that. It's a great meme. Should share it because it does bring about some deep insights. Until next time, friends, as always, I bid to you a fond farewell. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Here's a final bit of audio entertainment from the animatronically imaginary DJ Zed. Uplifting D&B, groove, pad, track, party, patterns, passion. Farewell, friends. Tune in for more as the Almost Daily Zencast will be back with more episodes. Do not give the system what it wants, friends. Instead, remember your own divinity. Heal thyself. Know thyself. Liberate thyself. None of those require violence.